pleasure. Pleasure meeting you. And really happy that you were able to come in and be a part of the opening of the exhibition. Angelique has written a book called Saltwater Healing, a myth, memoir, and poems. And she is my guest today. Welcome, Angelique.
Thank you so much.
Good. It's a pleasure. I'm glad that you're able to join me today. Welcome, Angelique.
Thank you so much.
Good. It's a pleasure. I'm glad that you're able to join me today to talk about your book, Saltwater Healing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You know, when you sent this book to me, I was absolutely, I should say, curious about the name, Saltwater Healing. And what came to mind initially was when, you know, growing up in Bahamas, the salt going to the beach was not only for a suntan, but also for healing from bruises and cuts.
Yes.
So that was my first thought about that, of your book. But then when it arrived, and I saw, you know, what it was all about, a myth, memoir, and poems, I then had a different curiosity. My curiosity seemed to keep blossoming and blossoming because I was curious to know, you know, what the poems were all about. But before we get to your reading of your poems, I want for you to tell my guests who they're watching us here in New York City on Time Warner, FiOS, and RCN, as well as worldwide on the internet, mnn.org. So can you give us an idea of your development? You know, you're an artist, a poet, a scholar,
yes,
a professor, and also an activist.
Yes.
So we have a lot there to talk about.
Yes,
okay,
we
so
do. Sure.
let's have that discussion on your development.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much for having me on your show. So I guess I should talk first about, you know, growing up in the Bahamas and my development, how I came to be sort of where I am now.
Sure.
Definitely has everything to do with the ocean and the land and the sea, which were, for me, a fundamental part of my own nurturing, really. And so that's sort of what this book became about for me. And so it's really important then, I think, to talk about how did I get where I am. So a really long story short.
Okay.
I grew up in the Bahamas and with fairly humble beginnings. I come from a poor working class family. You know, growing up was always pretty much a struggle. And I was raised by my grandma and my mom, who really wanted, I was really good at school. I was a good student. They wanted me to, I was expected in some ways to do really well. And so it was a lot of pressure. But I had a lot of issues with my family, and on my mom was really challenged with a lot of different things, and both of my parents were addicted to different drugs. And so my growing up years were really challenging. But my grandma, who's really central into this story, was really a kind of central part of me being able to kind of survive a lot of that. And so really that was a part of it. But yeah, so my teenage years were really challenging. I struggled being in and out of school. I went to St. Anne's High School, which you probably know.
Oh, okay. I'm a student from St. Anne's as well.
Yeah. So, and I have worked I've had jobs since I was 11. You know, I've worked. My mom, even though we were really poor, she wanted me to be in private schools, and you know how challenging that is.
Yeah.
So I went to public school for a while when I was in elementary and primary schools. But for junior high and for high school, she really wanted me to be in private school. I went to Temple Christian for my junior high and for most of my elementary, but I was in and out of that depending on whether we had enough money. But I had scholarships most of my junior high years. At scholarships. I worked to make sure I had enough money to keep staying in school. So school and learning has always been, and reading has been sort of central to my development. My mom was an avid reader. Both of my grandmothers were avid readers, so it was very important to me. And so I was really challenged during my teen years. Didn't really have the money to finish school, so I actually dropped out of high school in 11th grade, I took my O-levels, you know, the GCE O-levels, which is a British, you know, exam that in much of the Caribbean, in the British Caribbean, we took back in those days. And so I left early. I thought that it would be better for me to just get a job, and so I was lucky. I was working in a bunch of different places, bartending, working all kinds of places to make ends meet, and living on my own because my mom wasn't able to take care of me at some point. So I was living with a family, paying rent, paying school fees. And so I just sort of, it was too much, and so one of my aunts through marriage said, you know, interview at her bank. She worked at an offshore bank called Guarantee Trust Bank. And I got a job I was really good at accounting. I got an A on my O-levels in accounting. I took the Pittman exams. Did really well in math and accounting. And so I started working for them. They trained me. I started as a junior accountant, data entry, you know. This was in 1993, 92, 93. And I just worked my way up, and, you know, I started taking classes at College of the Bahamas. I ended up taking classes at College of St. Benedict and St. John's, which had something at St. John's, actually, sort of college prep classes, because I always wanted to go to college. Once I learned there was such a thing as college, I wanted to go there. And so I worked, and my boss at the bank at one point said to me, "Don't you want to go away to college?" And I said, "Well, of course I want to go away to college. I don't have money for that." And so he said, "Oh, you know, we'd help you, you know." And I said, "Really?" And I don't think he thought I was really serious, but I was serious. And so the very next day, I did my research. I knew where I wanted to go. I picked Nova Southeastern University, which back then, it has a campus now in the Bahamas, actually, sometimes 4 bars, you know, just to save enough money. So I did that for 4 years, and that's sort of
hard-working lady. That's great. So you took accounting in school, in college. So did you continue as an accountant, or did you change your degree somewhere along the way?
Well, so what happened was I
no, they say that it's not where you start, it's where you end.
So I always, like I said, loved reading. I was an avid reader. Loved it. I really wanted to do, when I was at St. Anne's, I had this sort of struggle, you know, in high school they sort of make you pick, oh, do you want to be in the business or the science or the art track? And I really wanted to take literature, and I really wanted to take biology, and I really wanted to take accounting, and they were like, what are you doing? And I said, well, this is what I want to do. So I always had a kind of, had a lot of different interests. So in college I did 2 minors, humanities and global studies, and so I was able to take a lot of liberal, it was like a sort of liberal arts-based undergraduate curriculum. So I was able to take a lot of different classes, and that really expanded my consciousness, my sense of history. I learned more about home in the Caribbean than I did living in the Bahamas, and sort of where my love for literature and wanting to pursue graduate work in Caribbean and post-colonial studies came later. But yeah, so I had these amazing literature professors who said, you know, you're really good at this. You can do this. Why don't you think about a graduate degree in English literature? And I was okay, so I thought about it. And at the time, I don't know if you remember this, but in 2000, our banking laws changed. So our secrecy laws changed. The deal was that I was supposed to go back and work for the bank for 4 years because they helped me for 4 years. But they didn't have a job for me at the end of the day. When I graduated, they had replaced my position. Of course, they didn't have any other openings, and so they said, you're free from this to go off. And so I applied to graduate schools, and I got into Florida Atlantic University in Boca, same area that I was already living. I was living a little more south of that in Florida. But then I did my master's in English literature. I specialized in multicultural literature, started exploring and reading and learning, and I started teaching. And I got an assistantship, basically to teach freshman composition classes, writing, and then they paid for my tuition, and I got a stipend. And so I was able to start my master's. I did my master's in 2 years there. And that's when it all started. I started writing poetry. I started really developing my own creative voice, and then also developing my scholarly work. And also my activism. All sort of started really as an undergraduate, but graduate school really. And this was around 2002 when I did that.
When you say you did scholarly work, what kind of work did you do there?
Well, like literary criticism, studying literature and culture, writing about it, responding to texts, And so I did a master's thesis, for example. We wrote lots of papers. I took lots of different classes, and you write. I responded to the text using theory and coming up with arguments about how do we read this material, you know. Like I was introduced to writers like Michelle Cliff and Audre Lorde and Jamaica Kincaid and Native American writers like Joy Harjo and Simon Ortiz, who I really love. South African writers and all these different writers who I had never read before, and so I became very passionate about it. I started using them in my teaching. I started teaching literature classes, and I fell in love with teaching, which I didn't expect. So, you know, I wasn't really sure I wanted to be an accountant, but I wasn't really sure I wanted to be a writer. I really wanted to be a writer, and when I realized that I could do that and I could earn money and I could do something I was really passionate about, I figured out how to do it, and I sort of fell into it, but had really good guidance from professors along the way who helped me, because I didn't even know what graduate school was. They didn't even know about this stuff. So then I learned and I figured it out.
So all of these things you learned over in the United States, going to undergraduate and graduate school. So not, if you had stayed in the Bahamas, it would have been a totally different.
I don't know. I think that home for me was a really complicated place during my formative years. I have a much stronger relationship with home now that I left, and that's what this book is about. Being able to see home in a different way, understanding my own sense of history, and having a deep ancestral connection to home and to the region generally, and really feeling connected in that way, which is what this book is about. But it took me a while to get there. Because of my difficult family and difficult childhood, I had a difficult relationship, let's say, with home. My mom and my grandma both passed away when I was really young. My grandma passed when I was 18, and my mom passed when I was 19. And so home was very difficult, a difficult place, and I don't have a relationship with my father and most of my father's family. Some, but it's difficult.
So it's a long gap between 19 and writing this book. So you had a lot of thinking and suppressing your feelings then.
Well, some of these poems, actually, especially the ones about my mom and my grandma, I wrote a long time ago. I really started seriously writing poetry during my undergrad years, but I didn't have the craft yet. I started to build the craft and really develop my writing in the master's program. Even though I was focusing on scholarly work, I always wanted to also do creative work. And so I was able to take a little bit of some workshops and work with some professors there. And also I created a writing community. I met really great people at FAU, and I formed a writing community. I did poetry nights and did readings. I did a little bit of slam poetry. And worked that way, and that sort of helped develop my craft. But so some of these poems that are in Saltwater Healing, like Min Kisi about my grandma, Never Again about my mom, those are poems I wrote very early. I wrote those probably in early 2001, 2002, and worked on them slowly over time. So some of these poems are 10 and 12 years in the making.
Well, let us take a break here now and let you read one of those poems.
How's that? Sure.
So we're going to mix it up. Because at your launch, it was really powerful, and it was really, of course you had a lot of your scholarly students there as well.
Some of my students, but mostly friends. Mostly friends, my writing friends. Because when I eventually I did my PhD work at University of Florida, which was another sort of really generative time for me, really creative time, even though I was doing this intense scholarly academic work. I also really pursued my creative work as a part of a kind of therapy for me, but also necessary. Like Audre Lorde says, poetry is not a luxury, right? It's necessary for our very survival, and I do feel that that's been my mantra for many years. And so, and then I got a postdoc at NYU here in New York in Africana Studies. So I was here 2008, 2009 for a full year, And I also developed my writing. I did a lot of workshops and created a writing community and actually participated in something called Tongues of Fire at the Audre Lorde Project, which was incredibly amazing. That really helped me to develop my craft.
Right, okay.
So,
how about the workshops that you attended, a workshop in Ghana?
I just went to a conference in Ghana. Yari Yari and Twaso, Continuing the Dialogue, the third international conference on literature by women of African ancestry. Okay. And that just happened this year. I just got back. But actually that conference, the second one, was here in New York. I came to New York to that conference, and that was a really life-changing experience. And I actually think I read this poem, Minkisi, which I'm about to read, at that conference, open mic, and I felt so supported by other women of color and black women writers who said, you know, your stuff is good, do something with it.
Yes.
And I didn't even think that I could be a writer in this way, and a poet, and a serious poet, and I was so encouraged and nourished, and I even maintained connections with those same women from 2004, who I ended up seeing again over the years, and then culminating in seeing them in Ghana in 2013. Minkisi is a word in the Congo tradition. Minkisi are objects that contain medicines and a soul that are spirit embodying and spirit directing, thought to affect healing and other phenomena. That's from Flash of the Spirit, which is all about the African traditions and retention of different religions and spiritual practices across the diaspora and in the Caribbean. And so I studied this book, and so I used Minkisi as a way to talk about objects that I've kept from my grandma. My grandma, she was a huge part of my growing up years, and she had these things that I ended up keeping before she left. She moved to Freeport, a different island from Nassau, when I was 14 because she was ill, and my mom couldn't take care of her. My mom couldn't take care of me or her anymore, so she went to go live with my Aunt Halson in Freeport, who was her eldest daughter, and it made more sense. And then I went to live with my other grandmother, and then eventually went to live with this other family. So my last contact with her was really at 14. So you can sort of imagine that, and that's sort of, you know, the basis of this whole book is about my memories of her that are fuzzy, that are feel far away. But after she passed, I had all these visions of her. She would come to me in dreams. I felt her spirit and her presence all the time. So this really interesting way, I feel closer to her than I ever have. Like, I always feel her around me. She's constantly my guardian. Her spirit is always with me.
That's good.
And so this is about her, and this is about me trying to hold on to these memories. The other thing about her, she worked as a domestic worker for most of her years. She was, I found this identification card. She worked at the Dundas, which you know, the Dundas in Nassau.
Dundas Center.
Yeah, and it read General Servant on the identification card, and that really stuck with me, right? That's how she was defined, you know, during the 1940s, 1950s in the Bahamas, which was a very segregated space. And as a dark brown skinned woman coming from Inagua, she grew up in Inagua, moved to Nassau. What her life must have been like as a black woman, who then went on to have a really light-skinned child, who's my mother, with a white Methodist priest, which is another story. But so her story always, I wanted to know more about her, and I don't have a lot of photographs of her. So something that also comes up in this is me trying to hold on to these memories. So this is what this poem is about. Minkisi. I open the box of memories where I keep your voice. I hold on to the fan made of blue feathers, the color of ocean's play. You kept it in a special place on your bureau, that fluffy fan, still in its plastic box. I would go to it, playing dress-up, wearing your church dress with goldish yellow flowers, pretending to be you with careful fanning strokes. When I unfurl the fan, your essence fills the space I occupy. As I breathe in that cloudy picture, holding on to it, with your song to guide me in this reverie. I always heard you coming, the dangling silver gliding on your delicate, dark brown wrists, emitting a relentless power, hands curled from sweeping and scrubbing. I wear those bracelets, the sound of you, a faint noise in my ears. The silver bracelets speak of you. They whisper in harmony of your determination to perform in a world that could not see you. I gaze at withered photographs, searching in the shadows to discover you. Flashes caught by chance, holes in time, haunting with long days of cooking for white families, still bringing fervor home. You stare back with defiant eyes, reminding me of your stern, cold love, always assured through stories, songs, and tasty meals made from grits, rice, and sardines. I keep the tarnished silver key to your bedroom as if it will unlock some mysterious black hole, transporting me to the time I need back. Time we didn't have. Those nights creeping into forever, dangling on despair, became easy in your arms as we slept, and I dreamt of the Bookie and Barabi tales, songs, stories you sang to keep my imagination spirited. I want them again. Your fan's breeze, your silver's melody, and your key's magic, Grandma, are what I have left of you in my box of memories.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
That reminds me, I lived with my grandmother for, I think, 18 months to 2 years on Long Island, Bahamas.
Mm-hmm.
And I always, reflect back on her being tall, skinny lady, and she was a fast walker. So I always had to remember running to keep up with her. When she's going to the field, she would always, go to the field either when I'm, in school, but at sometimes she would on weekends. I'm home with her, so she would, go on the weekend, and I had to always run to catch up with her. So I always remember, that those are the memories that linger long when you like our age. You remember the grandma, you always, they are a very important part of our growing up, because you always reflect back on what they did, and back in those days, when it was really hard.
Hard times.
Yeah,
and I wanted to capture that. She was such a powerful presence,
Mm-hmm.
And everyone in the neighborhood would talk about my grandma with a kind of fear and respect. She was known as a sort of hard woman. She was hard, and she was very powerful, and also she'd been through so much and stuff that I knew that I would never fully know, and I feel like one of the reasons I wanted the art pieces in Saltwater Healing in a lot of ways are dedicated to her, the idea of the woman tongue especially, because there's this way that the woman tongue is supposed to, there are these beautiful trees in the Bahamas that have these beautiful pods in the winter, in the springtime, to grow again, and they make this noise, and so I always imagine that because they make that noise, that's why it was called, that's the sort of colloquial term, is woman tongue. Right, they make noise, and women make noise. But then I thought, wow, if we think about this noise as resistance, this noise as defiance, this noise as women claiming space, right, in patriarchy, in male-dominated spaces, I felt that the woman tongue began to represent what I saw as her voice. That I wanted to tell her story because I didn't know if anyone else would tell her story, right? And so many, and I'm one of her only. She only has a few grandchildren because we have a small family on that side, And so my mom only had me. I'm her only child, and so that feeling of wanting to carry on her legacy and her story. And the reason I use the landscape, the seascape, the fruit trees, and all the trees in the Bahamas is because I remember her saying things when I was a kid, like, trees don't lie, or, pay attention to nature, pay attention to, she was very avid about, the the bush. Cerasee, I had to drink Cerasee every day. Bush tea, bush medicine, you know, lime, boil the lime bush. We had a lime tree, an avocado tree, and pear tree right in the yard, and she knew which bushes. We had Cerasee grown in the backyard, and so she was very attached to nature and that way connected, and I feel like she made that a part of me too. And so a part of me recalling or remembering her is me imagining all the things she would have told me if we had more time together. And so that's why it's a memoir, because these are stories that some start with a kernel of truth or an idea or a memory, but then I take it into the realm of the imagination.
Okay. Yeah. And, you know, you're talking about the dilly tree and the tamarind tree and all those trees, Poinciana tree. You know, it seemed to be like the ladies from the outer islands, when they came to live in the Bahamas, they brought something that they tried to make their yard a piece of their island.
Right, from, you know, coming from the Family Islands into Nassau.
The same, because my mother, we had a salva tree and a canep tree and a pear tree and grapefruit tree. So they tend to bring all those things that, you know, that they left behind, bring them. They want to have that in their yard.
Yeah.
So that
and
was,
that is
you know
true.
what I noticed in your poems, you didn't talk about the music. Were there any music happening at that time that kind of, you know, resonate with you, that you were able to bring along with you? You know,
sure. Yeah, and I you know, I don't know why I feel like there's a rhythm in my work and in my poetry that I think reflects, you know, all of the music that we have. So I think that's where it comes through, but nothing specific, you know. I mean, of course, we grew up listening to the radio. We had we had our one channel, ZNS, and you know, I was a child of the 80s, so also, and it was the time when a lot of American pop culture was sort of being infused in our. I was very influenced by that. I listened, when I was growing up, I listened to all the R&B and the old, you know, the funk and classic music, you know, from the 60s and 70s that my mom was listening to, so I grew up listening to that. My grandma was, you know, a church woman, so gospel, and she was in the choir. So I was also in the choir growing up, so music was also that. I have a cousin who was Rastafarian, so we always listened to reggae, roots reggae, and then when I was a teenager, I was really into dub and now we call dance hall, but I was into dub back then, and so I was into I love music. I was into lots of different kinds of music. Rake and scrape, love rake and scrape, love. But I do feel that, you know, in being away, the longer you're away, the more I reach back and want those things, and I hold on to these, you know, these
cultural
like
components.
When I was just home at Christmas, we listened to Ronnie Butler like this whole night. I don't remember what night. It might have been Christmas Eve or something, and we just listened to Ronnie Butler, and all the memories, you know, come back of listening to these old songs, Eddie Minnis and so on, you know, and so music was always a part of that for me. But I guess I don't reference anything explicitly, but I do feel like it's a part of the rhythm of how I put my lines and words together.
Now you're an artist, a poet, a scholar, an activist, and professor.
Yes.
How do you how do they all gel together? Which one gives you most pleasure?
Poetry. I love If I could just write poetry all the time, I would love it. But I think that my work, my poetry, my artwork, they kind of melt together. Poet first, and then becoming, poetry is art, right? So and that's one of the things that I wanted to do with this, what I call a literary art. This memoir, using both a kind of mixed media approach with collage and paper and handwriting and fabric and seeds and sand and cotton, all of these materials to kind of speak to the words as well in, you know, in the book, which was an art piece, right? Which I think, pretty sure you're going to be talking about the big art pieces. Each of these pages in the book are actually, you know, 12 by 12, what I created. So the whole entire piece, the first installation was 4 by 7. So this artwork grew out of my poetry. It grew out of my creative inspiration to say and reflect stories and this idea of survival. And for me, writing, period, whether it's scholarly writing and my academic writing, but also my creative writing, has been about engaging with identity, engaging with my own sense of history as a mixed race woman who identifies as black, dealing with my sexuality, dealing with gender, and dealing with being working class and growing up in poverty, dealing with all the things we don't like to talk about, the messy stuff, you know? So I think that all of my writing has been about that. My scholarly writing intersects with my creative writing. I feel like I use my creative work and my artwork now that I'm sort of now emerging. I feel like I'm sort of emerging as this multimedia artist. That's what I'd like to continue working as, but always a poet. That's the place where I can say some of the things that maybe I can't quite say in the scholarly, academic, rigid world. That's much more, there's a rigidity and there's a way that you have to operate in that world that doesn't always feel like me. So my community work and my creative work help balance all of that out, right?
Yeah, that's just going to say that, you know, the past has something positive on the future.
Yes.
You know, you do bring out the past, but it's the positive things that you learn, that you do, that help you to navigate through this troubling world that we're in, you know?
Yes.
When we look at all the tragedies that are happening, you know, around us, you know, like how do you think we kind of get our equilibrium and find peace in all of this? You know, it's the same thing that happens in our lifetime when we're younger, things that we can't do anything about, but it's troubling.
Yeah.
And how do you see us being able to kind of look at the tragedies and try to find our equilibrium and also find peace and not be and be fearless?
Yeah, well, that's what my work has always been about, you know, survival stories. You know, this collection is really about my own survival, but how that is connected certainly to to the Bahamas, to what I call the places that I call home, the place I call home, that I'm very deeply committed to, the region, the Caribbean generally, but also as people of color on the planet who've experienced, and people generally who experience any kind of injustice. So I'm deeply committed to issues of social and environmental justice. A part of me using the landscape and the seascape and the ocean is also in this sort of working through to find a place of healing, is thinking about our connection not only to each other, but also to the environment and to the earth, to the planet. You know, we're in deep problems right now with the carbon dioxide level just rose to over 400 parts per million. You know, we're running out of fresh water. We're having this severe climate change, extreme weather. You know, we had 50 degrees, a few days ago, and now we're 90 degrees. And so, I mean, in the north, we're feeling it certainly. You know, the sea levels are rising. I mean, I think all of it's connected. And
you know, just here in Nassau 10 days ago, they had the
flooding.
The sea sea surge and the spring from the from the water, from the earth. And there was flooding in Bahamas, caused
extreme flooding,
and homes destroyed.
Homes are flooded.
You know,
electricity is down.
So Oklahoma,
tornado, the Superstorm Sandy here in New York. These things are all happening, and you know, it's easy to sort of say, oh, you can't really say it's actually this, but what I think scientists are saying is that we are at a critical juncture, and we need to figure it out. And so I think for me, these things are connected. You know, I see myself in the tradition of feminists, particularly black feminists and other women of color feminists, and social justice and community justice, really working towards thinking about how can we create a better world and create a better future. And for me, a part of that is thinking about healing, right? Healing. Right. We have so much healing to do, right? Just in terms of historical injustice. I'm really thinking about our place in the world. There's so many issues. And so I think that we need to reconnect with each other, but also reconnect with the earth. We have to realize that we have differences. You know, I feel like a part of my work as a poet and a writer is to help us think about and find a place of consciousness. I try to write from a place that's honest. I try to really reflect on my own experiences and be really real about what has happened to me and really uncover a lot of the silences that I think are really damaging to our communities in terms of a lot of different things, you know.
Well, you know, the Bahamian American Cultural Society has always, you know, exposed our culture. And we expose our culture to bring about an understanding between peoples and also to help, you know, bring about peace. That's through our culture. Yeah. You know, that's one of the things that we have always emphasized. And this year we're celebrating our 25th anniversary doing just that, exposing our culture through, you know, music, art, literature. That's why when Sonia mentioned that you know, I have a friend who's going to, a Bahamian girlfriend who's going to be launching her book here, I thought, well, whoa, I need to be there. She said, you know, yeah, I'd love you to join me. So I was really happy that, you know, I was able to come and be a part of that launch. So let me ask you, as an activist, what are you involved in at this time?
Right now, I'm doing work and have done work in Haiti after the earthquake. I just should say, first of all, as a Bahamian, you know, which I'm sure you know, we have a very complicated and at times tenuous relationship with Haitian migrants and Haitian Bahamians who live in the Bahamas. And I've always felt that is completely wrong, basically, and we need to do better about that. We have the second largest Haitian diaspora outside of the United States in the Bahamas. And I've always felt that way when I lived there, living abroad and living away during my sort of years of migration across the U.S., learning more, being a migrant myself, like being a migrant, you begin to sort of understand what it's like to live somewhere else and be, you know, viewed and discriminated against and experience all kinds of, you know, harshness, you know. So I have always had a kind of sensitivity or wanting to sort of have a better, feel like we need to have better, more ethical relationships with Haiti. As the Bahamas, we have a very connected history, and I feel like we need to know that more about that. So anyway, that was sort of my backstory about that. But and I've written a number of things about Haitian migration into the Bahamas, sort of calling for better, more a more ethical relationship, having better understanding of the history. You know, more, compassion, really compassion. Understanding how, you know, Haiti doesn't exist in a vacuum, and that's sort of been one of my things that I talk about a lot. So I started, after the earthquake, me, Aaron Green, Helen Clanaris, Lynn Sweeting, and Nicolette Bethel started a letter writing campaign in the Bahamas. We called it Haitian Bahamian Solidarity. We started a little organization that was a web-based group that we created a campaign to ask the Bahamian government to stop deporting Haitians for 6 months after the earthquake. And we were successful. The Bahamas did agree to that. And I
remember reading that, yes.
Yeah, and we kept writing. We did a letter writing campaign. We had a whole standard letter to send to, at the time, the Minister of Immigration and to the Prime Minister. And so we had these sort of standard letters that people could just send out. And we did, and also encouraging people to write letters in the newspapers. So the Guardian, the Tribune, the Bahama Journal, which was still publishing at the time. So we kept that up for about 6 months. We kept a dialogue. We kept a kind of record of all the different, you know, the editorials, the letters written, the articles in the newspapers. We created a blog, and that still exists, Haitian Bahamian Solidarity at WordPress. And at some point it sort of started to fade out, realizing like how much momentum could we really keep up. At the time I was approached by a friend of mine in New York who's of Haitian descent, wanting to put together a grassroots healing collective to go to Haiti and do work around mental and spiritual healing. And so I worked with her, Naima Penniman, and Beatrice Anderson, who is of Jamaican descent. The three of us organized and founded a group called IET Resurrect.
Okay.
And we planned and orchestrated several fundraisers in New York. I did a fundraiser in the Bahamas. There was a fundraiser in the Bay, in Oakland. We did a bunch of online campaigns, raised money, and we had 2 successful delegations on the year anniversary of the earthquake and then the second year anniversary of the earthquake. I went in January 2012. I've been to Haiti a few times, several times with planning, but I did one of the delegations, January 2012, and we took 15 people with us, all people of African descent or had some connection to Haiti, to do and collaborate with local Haitian organizations. And so that was the big thing I did in January 2012. Leading up, it was a 2-3 year work. We're still doing some work. We're continuing to do smaller projects. That was our big project.
Okay.
But our main goal is to create a collaborative exchange and connect people. And it was really amazing, powerful, hard, very hard work, extremely powerful. And so our work continues in different ways. I have taken a bit of a step back, focusing on this book, wanting to get this book out, and my own scholarly work and teaching. But we're going to keep doing at least one project a year. And sometimes I will be able to join, sometimes I won't, but I'm a part of that core collective. I also do work with Critical Resistance, which is a prison abolition group that organizes to dismantle the prison industrial complex. I worked with Critical Resistance when I was in graduate school in Gainesville at University of Florida, where I worked in, this was a community-based organization, not associated with the university, I should say. But I did a lot of community work in Gainesville. That became between 2004 and 2008 when I lived there, I became very politicized. I was president of the Black Graduate Student Organization. I was in Critical Resistance. I was on the Student Government Council. I did a lot of tutoring in the community. Gainesville was the first place that I lived that was really segregated. It was a very segregated city, and I lived in South Florida, which is not quite as segregated. It's a much more diverse place, and so it politicized me, and so I started my work with Critical Resistance then, took a little bit of a break, and now I've joined them again, and I'm doing more work with them. And I also do work on Caribbean sexualities, with LGBT organizing in the region through a New York-based group called the Caribbean IRN. Well, the Caribbean IRN is a regional group, so we have different parts and components and people who do work all around the region. But I started the work in New York. It's housed through the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies at CUNY, it's the University of New York. And I'm on the board of the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies at CUNY here in New York.
Okay, so you cover it for their board meetings,
yes. Yes, and I do work with them. So I'm starting I just finished my second year being on the board, and I'm about to start my third year.
And congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah. So my community work sort of takes a lot of different forms, from grassroots activism, which I feel is really, I'm deeply committed to different kinds of national organizing, or even working within different institutions and centers, I feel is also really important for me to bring my energy to. I want to do more, but those are my main three that I'm focused on right now.
This year is Bahamas' 40th independence.
It is.
Yeah. Are you doing anything? Are you writing anything around the 40th?
Sure, I should do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
How
okay,
about
Beryl.
do you want to do a poem?
I'll think about it. Yeah. Definitely thinking about the 40th coming up, and certainly I'm sure that will inspire me. Something that I should say that I'm doing a new community project, a community-based project. It's actually an oral history.
Oh, oral history.
Yeah, it's called Love and Affection, Growing Up in the Time of HIV/AIDS. And I'm doing it with a friend of mine, Tay Okamoto, who's based here in New York. And it will be, we started it actually, and we're going to see where it goes. But basically, we're interviewing people who have lost parents, guardians, or guardians, or someone who was a caretaker to AIDS. And we're interviewing them and getting their stories. We feel like this is really important. It's an issue that's affected certainly many different communities. It's affected and certainly affected communities in the United States, but we're thinking about it not only as a U.S.-based, but an international oral history collection. So speaking of the Bahamas, thinking that I want to perhaps do some interviews when I go home.
Okay.
My mother passed.
How long have you started this project?
We just started this year. We've interviewed 3 people so far.
Okay, okay. Is it on tape?
We're interviewing, it's audio.
Audio.
Yeah, so once we...
Here in New York City?
Well, we're doing it, people have been in touch with us from all over. We've interviewed people who are in the Bay Area, people who are upstate New York, people who are based in New York.
Good, good.
I have some folks in South Florida who I'm going to interview, and also thinking about some folks in the Bahamas.
Okay, because just this year I did an HIV, You Can Make a Difference, was the name of my show.
Oh.
And I had a doctor at, 2 doctors at Roosevelt St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital.
Oh.
One was in pediatrics, and another person, he's, I guess, on the general hospital, dealing with AIDS patients. Someone from Harlem United.
Oh.
And also a priest, actually a reverend, who is in charge of the churches, the Baptist churches, bringing AIDS awareness to them.
Oh.
And the AIDS Crisis Center here on the Lower East Side. So they were all a part of this panel discussion on AIDS. Yeah.
Yeah. When I lived in New York, I did volunteer work at the Audre Lorde Project, and then I also did work at the AIDS Service Center.
Okay.
I did 2 workshops there with their peer educators, with the women's groups.
Good, good.
Yeah, it was really amazing. So I've really wanted to do different work around HIV/AIDS, and I've thought a lot. I've done things. I did things in college. I did a lot of organizing in college and some in grad school. But this project is particularly important to me because I lost my mother to AIDS, and so losing a parent, there's a certain time period where I think that there are a lot of people who've lost parents or guardians. And what was that experience like?
A lot of families.
Yeah, and so we called it Love and Affection because we wanted to think about the fact that a lot of these stories are silent, right? It's hard to talk about. AIDS is such a taboo, still, right? And growing up in the Bahamas especially, and knowing what I went through, losing my mother, losing her, and experiencing the kind of stigma. And so a part of Saltwater Healing, too, is about me finding healing around that, too. The death of both of these 2 people who raised me, but also thinking about that, too, healing around my mom. And these stories that you're not supposed to talk about. You're not supposed to talk about AIDS or HIV. We're supposed to pretend. My aunt to this day, my aunt who took care of my mom when she was sick, says she just died. Will never say the word AIDS or will never say HIV.
Yeah, well, even back then, no one was able to even identify.
Oh yeah, well it was in the early 90s it was it was very difficult.
Yeah.
So we want to capture some of these stories, and I feel ultimately with the publishing of Saltwater Healing, like thinking about and what we were saying earlier, that healing is a fundamental part of us being able to heal ourselves to be able to create a better world. If we can't, we have to start with ourselves, right?
Exactly. True,
and if we can't figure out ways to relate to each other, deal with the very difficult histories that we share, Angela Davis says we inhabit our histories even if we don't know them. And so, one of the reasons that I feel education is so important is that so much of our educational experience exclude our stories as people of color, as women of color, especially as people who are migrants, coming into this country. But in our places where we're from, as migrants, where places we come from that are formerly colonized, we don't get our full story. Growing up in the Bahamas, I'm sure you experienced it too. We learned barely anything. I learned barely anything about Bahamian history or Caribbean history at all until I took the BJCs, and we got a crash course in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. Quick. I learned this before we take these exams,
True.
And it was really, so.
When I did the panel discussion on You Could Make a Difference, and to hear the progress that AIDS, the medicine, and the way of testing, you can testing yourself without having to go to our a clinic,
yeah.
or
It's huge.
It has progressed quite a bit. And even having done that panel discussion, I'm hearing a lot of churches are now getting involved in testing their members and other people that can come in and
That's so
be tested
good.
without any kind of
Yeah.
public awareness,
Right.
And so there are a lot of mini programs around that is now I think even Alicia Keys.
Oh, she's doing a lot of work.
She's doing something on HIV.
HIV/AIDS in Africa, on the continent.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of work, but what I think is missing, though, is us really getting out of the stigma, right?
Yeah.
Because HIV/AIDS is still either it's seen as a gay disease or a disease you get if you're being promiscuous, or you did something, and it's because it's attached to sex, and we don't talk about sex and sexuality, enough. We don't really engage those things, and so there's so much silence, and there's so much taboo and shame. One of the questions that Tay and I have developed around this project is to think about this question of shame. One, we talk about how this experience of having a parent or guardian die and losing this person, how did it determine some of the choices that you made in your life?
Right.
But then also, what are the things around shame that you're carrying around? And to me, that was something really huge, because I felt that shame, and I've started talking about it more, but it took me a long time to say publicly or to even share. I would wait. I would have to get to know someone before I said, what happened to my mom. Much like, creating this book for me was, particularly the art pieces for me, was about a kind of healing process, and you're thinking about using these objects that I had found, over the years. I've been collecting, bits of fabric and pieces of things, but when I realized I was invited to be in Transforming Spaces, the art project, which is where this originally started, I had started the pages before and thinking about it as a book, but then I started to think about it as an installation, as an art piece. But it actually, in the creating of it, and I talk about this in the beginning of my artist statement, I talk about this and talk about my process, that the process itself was the healing journey. So I think sometimes the process, the process in talking and having deep conversations, being able to share, is what helps us to get to a place, So that's why I see this, a place of healing. That's why I see these stories. And Saltwater for me is a metaphor, for healing, being able to submerge oneself, and to think about, I talk about salt in some of the poems in the narrative piece, that salt sort of pulls stuff out of you, It's like a detox. So you go in the ocean, you go in the sea, you have your sea bath to get it out, And if you're sick, my grandma would be like, go in the sea and you soak it out, and you have a fever, you have to come out, all the, or drinking Cereseed, detox, and so what was really incredible, I went home in March of 2012, about to put up this installation. I had to finish the pieces. I took everything with me, but then during the 2 weeks I was there, I picked up stuff on the beach. I went, pull the branches off of the woman tongue trees and pull them off, and I started putting this together, and this piece, and so this was a part of me. This was a part of me pulling this frame together, finding these objects, and then putting them directly onto the pages and these squares, these wooden squares that I joined with straw and androsia fabric. And I picked those deliberately because I wanted to think about the products that we use that are so visible, Straw and androsia are Bahamian, But I wanted to weave together these things that we don't talk about. Drug addiction, abuse, sexuality, painful stories, the things that we don't share, domestic violence, really things about race that we're uncomfortable with and don't want to talk about, death, poverty. So these are the things that have defined me. And so this is the beginning of Saltwater Healing, a myth memoir. And these 2 pages, actually, I wrote in New York, and I created this for Tongues of Fire writing workshop. So here it is. And so I wrote thinking about an audience who may not know all of the intimate details of the Bahamas or have a really tourist vision of the Bahamas as a place that's paradise. And so I was sort of engaging in that.
Right, okay, great.
Okay. It's better in the Bahamas. I remember hearing this over and over growing up on TV and the radio in Nassau. I remember words like paradise, sun, sand, and sea, describing the island nation I still call home, even though I've lived away for many years. I remember the smell of the ocean during summer, especially when sea grapes are ripe and in season. They are green and purple, round and fuzzy, a sweet fruit, yet salty like the sea. I remember the sounds of coconut trees telling their stories. I want to tell you my story, but it's not one of paradise. There are no beach-filled romances or happy endings in my story. You see, I took these pictures of the beach, the ocean, and sea grape and coconut trees to remind me of home. But when I lived at home, I barely had time to go to the beach or to enjoy the trees, sea grapes, or coconuts. And when I was growing up in all this beauty, there was all this sadness. Tragic stories I can't share with you. So much beauty I could never see until I left and came back. Leaving, returning home can be painful. How can I explain this hole inside of me wrapped in home, made and forged in memories of home? Because you don't want to hear about ghettos and paradise, about drug-addicted fathers and crack houses, about how my mom had to do not-so-romantic things to make sure we had lights, food, and rent. No, you don't want to hear that story. You want the sun, sand, and sea. Man, I want it too. I want to be home and be me. I want to have memories that don't sting me. I want my people to love me and accept me in all my light-skinned, feminist, black, queer, radical self. I want it to be better in the Bahamas for all Bahamians.
Exactly, Angelique. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure too. We could talk all day.
Definitely. You have to come back.
Okay. We'll pick a different topic and we'll talk.
You have to come back.
Okay.
It's been
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Saltwater Healing.
Saltwater Healing.
Definitely. It's the book.
Pontana Paper Press. You can find me on my blog, consciousvibration.blogspot.com if you want to know more, or email me at angeliquevnixon@gmail.com.
Great. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you.
It's quite a beautiful book.
Thank you so much.
I'm happy you did it, and come back. Do another one.
Thank you.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Very nice.
Sure.
Very nice. Oh, okay.
Is that it?
It's been great.
Oh, we're good? Okay.